It is a beautiful September 2nd day. I am starting this meeting. Ooh, that was loud. I'm Lisa Golias, and I'm president-elect, and I'm filling in for President Ian Campbell. So far, how am I doing? It's the V-neck. Lauren told me it was the V-neck, not the shoes. So anyway, so this is, interestingly enough, the 245th day of the year. There's 121 days left. Ooh, what are you going to do with those 121 days? So please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, so for our inspiration moment today, this will be given by past President Pam Adams, President and CEO of ISU Insurance Services, Colorado. Pam.
Thanks so much, President-elect Lisa. It's so fun to say that. Well, in preparing for the inspirational moment today and realizing that we're on the eve of the Labor Day holiday and weekend, I couldn't help but think about how much labor is in demand today. It's affecting product and consumer goods availability, the services available to businesses and consumers, and how much we pay for those products and services. So a quick history of Labor Day. It was observed the first Monday in September. Labor Day is an annual celebration of the social and economic achievements of American workers. The holiday is rooted in the late 19th century when labor activists pushed for a federal holiday to recognize the many contributions workers have made to America's strength, prosperity, and well-being. Before it was a federal holiday, Labor Day was recognized by labor activists and individual states. After municipal ordinances were passed in 1885 and 1886, a movement developed to secure state legislation. New York was the first state to introduce a bill, but Oregon was the first to pass a law recognizing Labor Day on February 21st, 1887. And during 1887, four more states, Colorado, Massachusetts, New Jersey, and New York, passed laws creating a Labor Day holiday. By the end of the decade, Connecticut, Nebraska, and Pennsylvania had followed suit. By 1894, 23 more states had adopted the holiday. And on June 28th, 1894, Congress passed an act making the first Monday in September of each year a legal holiday. So how great is it that Colorado was one of the early adopters? And now we're in a time where you can't access the news, no matter your preferred format, without seeing headlines such as these. Oregon McDonald's asked 14-year-olds to apply amid labor shortage. I don't know if I want my food prepared by a 14-year-old, but maybe, I don't know. Pandemic unemployment benefits are ending, but for big companies, labor shortage worries aren't. Advertising's labor shortage is crushing agency employees who talk of 16-hour days and mounting client demands. So that doesn't sound very inspirational, but what is the good news that sticks out to me is that this labor shortage is about people. People are still important in a world where many jobs have been replaced by technology and machines. So it's inspirational to still know that people are what's really important to make the world go round, to make our Rotary Club go around. And I hope that all of you great people here get the chance to spend time on Monday celebrating your family and workers that are important to you.
Thank you, Pam. All right, so now our secretary's report will be delivered by Club Director Matt Isola, the owner of Tech Help and Consulting, part of the tech help and the labor shortage.
Right. Okay, filling in for Troy today, so wish me luck. Big shoes to fill. We have some prospective new members and guests that we would like to welcome to the club. Nick Morris is a guest of Pete Wall. Zara Bafar is a guest of Peg Johnston. And Aaliyah Menifee is a guest of Melly Kennard. Please say hi to them, say hello. Get to know them. Thank you guys for being here. Some guests, Phil Smith, which is our speaker today, Brian Carter, who is the guest of the speaker, Nick O'Connell, who is a guest of Kristen Brooks, Mark Wiltshire, who is Jim Wiltshire's son, and Chris Marseilles, which is a guest of Chris Hemingway. Okay, just a few announcements. Next week is the second of the month where we meet off-site at various locations, dates and times around the city, hosted by fellow Rotarians for our alternative week. Reservations directly with respective hosts are required 2 days prior to the event of your choice. Again, we are not meeting at the Warwick. If you would like to bowl, this is a plug for my meeting, please email me. We would love to have you. There's nothing like hitting the lanes on a Tuesday night with some friends, right? If you parked in the Warwick surface lot out back, please don't forget to pay your reduced Rotary rate of $7 at the registration desk on your way out. Do you or a guest of yours have special dietary restrictions? If so, please don't forget to check out our menu in the Tuesday meeting recaps and contact Lauren with as much advance notice as you can so she can plan accordingly. Raise your hand if you love the temporary sticker badges we have for our meetings. Don't worry, this is indeed temporary. We are limited on the storage space here at the Warwick and are in the process of ordering new badges for our nearly 200 club members. Unfortunately, this takes time, but we very much appreciate your patience. And lastly, the Colorado Rockies and District 5450 invite you to join us at Coors Field to have some fun while rooting for your hometown baseball team and help raise funds to eradicate polio. This event is Sunday, September 26th at 1:10 p.m. For more information, check out the flyers at each of your tables. Now, we also have some birthdays today, so I'll just read off the slide here. Hassan Latif, Martin Wanlich, Dave Dennis. Coming up on September 3rd, we have Frank Lawrence, Chad Gilman, and September 7th, there's no one there, I don't think, unless there's a person named September 7th. Is that it? Good. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Matt. All right, who's going to the baseball game? Come with me. Come on. 300 tickets. That's pretty good. All right, that's district. All right, speaking of district, we've got a district announcement. And this comes to all clubs within District 5450 about the youth and at-risk protection. Rotary International and District 5450 have a long and successful history of commitment to and community support of programming for youth and at-risk protected individuals. Rotary's International Statement of Conduct for Working with Youth is: Rotary International strives to create and maintain a safe environment for all youth who participate in Rotary activities. To the best of their ability, Rotarians, Rotarians partners, and other volunteers must safeguard children and youth, young people with whom they come in contact, and protect them from physical, sexual, and psychological abuse. This commitment reinforces Rotary International and District 5450's adherence to zero tolerance of abuse and harassment of any kind is unacceptable. New this year, prior to participating as a volunteer or sponsoring a program as a club involving protected individuals, Rotarian and non-Rotarian volunteers must meet specific requirements based on the program and the amount of contact anticipated. So note that all volunteers participating in club-sponsored programs at a minimum must review 2 documents: one, the Youth and At-Risk Protection Policy, and the Rotary International Youth Protection Guide. Both of these are on the district's website. The district's website is rotary5450.org. So it is pertinent to really understand how much contact you're in with youth programs. Based on the contact, you may be required for additional steps that might require a background check or a youth protection awareness tutorial and quiz. So based on that information, please go to the website if you are volunteering on any youth programs, okay? So it's all Rotarians' responsibility, all of us in this room, that we ensure that the district and club programs involving protected individuals are to provide a safe and caring environment. So please go to the website, okay, for a complete review. If you need questions, you can actually ask questions at the youth protection officer. His name is Joe Casa. His email is on the website. Okay, next up. Denver Rotary Club Foundation 2021 and 22 goals. Welcome DRCF President Sid Brooks, retired judge, U.S. Custom House.
Thank you, President-elect Lisa. Let me share some ideas with you, please, about the foundation, about your foundation, and it's your money in the foundation. Let me ask, how many here think they have a good understanding, some knowledge about what the foundation actually does? Show of hands, pretty good turnout. How many here think that they have some good understanding and knowledge about what the grantees to whom the foundation gives money every year, what they do? Okay, a good number less. Well, there are a good number of grantees, and what they do is awfully important. Let me start out first, however, by just asking members of the Board of Trustees of the foundation, would you stand up, please, so I can just thank you publicly for what it is you do, and thank you very much. With that group and the others who are not here, plus Lauren, plus Jill Santuccio, I don't believe I've seen her, Jack Green, and a handful of others. They're the ones that make the foundation function. They're the ones that make the foundation a success. Let me tell you what I think the foundation is to this club. The Denver Rotary Club Foundation is the most important, valuable, and powerful part of Denver Rotary Club 31. It spreads the goodwill, good reputation, and good works of Denver Rotary far and wide and deep throughout the Denver community and the Colorado community. I suggest to you it is the most visible part of Denver Rotary and makes us far more valuable and impactful than the club standing alone. Some would say it's the face of the club. This year, the foundation granted almost $150,000 to 11 different organizations, 11 different local organizations. And those organizations do irreplaceable, invaluable work throughout this community. They reach far and deep and wide into the community. The $150,000 also went to our own Rotary World Community Service Committee, which does work around the world and gives you opportunity as a volunteer to actually implement programs outside of Colorado on the world stage. The foundation, to a greater or lesser degree, directly or indirectly, impacts thousands of people thousands of people in the Denver metropolitan area and Colorado. It's important. It's really powerful. Our principal goal this year is to get you better acquainted with and knowledgeable about what our grantees do and how they do it. And in turn, with that knowledge and appreciation of what our foundation does and what the grantees do, we hope you will be more inclined to work with them, to volunteer, to contribute to your efforts, as well as contribute your contributions through the various fundraisers that we have. What do the grantees do and how do they do it? You've heard the names. I'm not sure you really know what they do. There was several weeks ago, we gave a grant to the Education Through Music organization, a new organization, creative. They partner with schools in need, schools for the underserved, provide instruments for the underserved students, and provide musical instruction. These are schools that otherwise do not have music as part of their curriculum. There is the High School Scholarship and Achievement Awards and Counseling Program, where we help high school kids get counseling and deal with issues that they otherwise are dealing with, and usually in schools that are underserved. We're not talking about the high-end schools. There's community resources. There is Scholastic Art Awards for those of you who've attended the Scholastic Art Award program every year. We're a big part of that. And We the People, where high school students are taught about the rule of law and the US Constitution, and they compete with schools from around Colorado and around the world. There are others, Project Cure. We have donated money to them, the St. Francis Center, and others. We've actually given money out also for victims of the Big Thompson flood and the wildfires from last year here in Colorado. We do a lot with the money. We leverage the money through our grantees. We ask of you $100 a year. Only 54% of our members are giving $100 a year. That's not that much for considering the great work that the foundation does and that our grantees are doing. So we ask for you to support that, support our annual fundraiser, our woohoo, I haven't yet pronounced this correctly, Woohoo Manatee, Carter Sales fundraiser that he's working with, and the Legacy Society, giving through the Legacy Society. So we urge you to keep your ears to the ground. We're going to tell you about our grantees, the kind of work we do and the impact we have in the neighborhood. And we thank you in advance for your contributions across the board.
Thank you so much, Sid. Speaking of Woohoo Manatee, Carter Sales will present our Good News Bucket. Carter is DRCF's immediate past president and broker principal, Carter Sales Commercial Real Estate Services.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Woohoo in a minute, okay? So what I'd first like to do is, this is the Good News Red Bucket. All of the proceeds do go to the Denver Rotary Club Foundation. Thank you, Sid. So who has good news? Yourself, your spouse, your job, your grandkid, your kids? Who has some? Oh, right here, Jeff.
So I want to say thank you to Sid for letting me use the condo that he had, or the house that he has up in Breckenridge, because it was great. I won that back in April, I think it was, when you had the bingo. I donated $20, but I'm going to donate more to the foundation. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. And you can do that through Woohoo. Credit cards right over here too. Okay. Thank you. Good afternoon.
Hello, I'm Mark Wiltshire. Thank you. And I have good news that I've been able to spend the last 3 or 4 weeks with Jim and my mother Jane and my sister Julia and my wife.
Excellent.
We're really pleased to be
Awesome.
back. Thank you.
Thank you. Are you going to make his $20?
I've got it.
You got it. I got to collect the money, you know. Okay. I'll see you after. Who else? Hi, Jane.
I debated biking, but the 25 miles made me not so sure about that one. But what I am sure about, I left postcards. I have an upcoming opening. And on the regular night that the theater club was going to meet, Lisa opted not to do it. So she allowed me to invite theater for a special Rotary opening on Thursday, the 16th, but it'll be everybody in Rotary is invited.
Thank you kindly. Credit card. Okay, credit card. Anybody else? Okay, so now, okay, woohoo, you've seen me before, maybe. You see what I have here? This is the Woohoo Humanity Challenge. First of all, team members, would you stand up just to show our team members? Could you stand up real quick? These are the people who are participating. These pink sheets on your tables, you can follow along with me. So in order to support the team, there's our website. You can get to it by just following this link here. Okay, it'll take you right to and then when you click on that, it'll take you right to Woohoo Humanity Challenge. So as Sid mentioned, if you're not a member of the DRCF and the $100, this is a good way to start. You can even start without $100, but it'll get you on the path to do that. My goal for this challenge, this bike challenge, is 10,000. Last year, we were just under 5. This is the second year. This is a district contribution, and we are in 4th place right now in terms of raising money. So on this 121 days left in the year, I'm doing the woohoo. And I want to thank you all. So please support our team. And we look forward to doing this for our grantees and supporting the foundation. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Carter. And if I'm not mistaken,
I had to pay to do this too. I just put my 20.
And if I'm not mistaken, I think I heard that Woo Humanity needs volunteers. Lots of volunteers.
And yes, we do. We're about 40 short. So you can go on woohumanity.org or get with me and I'll be set up.
Okay, yeah, you're welcome. All right, so for our program introduction today, please welcome our Club Director Meetings VP, Rick Luthold, Chairman of Sanderson Stewart.
Thank you, Lisa. Appreciate that. A lot of you out there have owned businesses. A lot of you own your houses. You've got retirement accounts. You watch the economy. And as we all know, we're in the middle of a pandemic, a substantial potential downturn, lots of people sick, lots of things going on from that standpoint. And yet look at our economy. There's more money available than anybody could ever think of. It's cheap money. Big corporations have dollars on the sidelines. And we're suffering from lack of ability to provide housing, to provide durable goods. It's certainly something we've never seen before. And there are people out there who study this, who analyze it, who talk about what the fiscal policy should be for our government as we go forward. And today we're very blessed to have Mr. Phil Smith. He's the National Field Director for the Concord Coalition. Concord Coalition has been around for 30 years, and it is a bipartisan commission that looks at fiscal policy, budget policy, and helps educate us as everyday folks, as well as the politicians that help run our country, as well as anybody else who wants to know more about that. So I'd like to welcome Mr. Smith to the podium today to tell us a little bit about where we think we're going in the next 5-10 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rick, for that kind introduction. And President-elect Lisa, good luck to you as you take charge. I've I've been in your shoes before. I don't know if I can say this word in here or not, so y'all forgive me. I'm a Kiwanian. But I was president of the Atlanta Kiwanis Club about 10 years ago, and I can tell you it was one of the most fulfilling experiences in my life, and I wish that for you too. And what a great club you have here. So thank you for having me. I can tell you of all the different challenges. For me, it was always breathed a sigh of relief when I saw that speaker walk through the back door, because we always had a plan B if the speaker didn't come, but plan A was always better. But it is a pleasure to be here. I want to introduce again Brian Carter, who's here with me today. Brian is the volunteer state director. Brian, would you stand so everybody can see? Brian's the volunteer state director for the Concord Coalition here in Colorado. He's done a magnificent job for us this week. He's put several days together for me. I've been up in Fort Collins, and we had an event on campus up there at Colorado State last night with students and members of the community. And then yesterday we spoke to the Fort Collins Rotary Club. So in fact, somebody at the Fort Collins Rotary Club, speaking of Kiwanis and Rotary, by the way, this proves how bipartisan you guys are, right? Because y'all have a Kiwanis speaker in here, but there was a guy yesterday, I wanted to write this down because he told me something. I was told by a Rotarian in Fort Collins yesterday that Kiwanis is an ancient American Indian word that translates in waiting to be a Rotarian. You know, I speak to so many Rotary clubs around the country that I feel like I kind of resemble that remark. But all kidding aside, I think Washington could learn a lot from Rotaries and Kiwanis and how we get along in our society. And so today, what I have planned for you is a fairly brief federal budget presentation. How many people remember when Ross Perot ran for president back in 1990? Remember that guy? So he talked a little bit like me, although he was from Texas and I'm from Georgia. But I show similar charts, and we were founded that same year that he ran for president back in 1992. And we were founded by both a Republican and a Democrat, which you'll hear is a very, very big theme for what we do. We were founded by Paul Tsongas, who ran for president that year on the Democratic ticket, and Warren Rudman, who was a Republican senator from New Hampshire for several years. And then our third co-founder is former Commerce Secretary Pete Peterson. And I was so excited when Sid came up to me earlier and said that he's been following the Concord Coalition for many, many years. And it made sense, I guess, that a retired bankruptcy judge would follow the work of the Concord Coalition, because we're trying to keep the country on a good fiscal stance, and we don't want our country to go bankrupt. But thank you, Sid. And Sid reminded me about Pete Peterson, and all three of the men that I just mentioned to you, unfortunately, have passed away. So we're trying to live out their legacy in many, many ways now. But the reason that they founded the Concord Coalition was simply for this: to educate Americans about the need to be fiscally responsible as it pertains to the federal budget. So that has us talking about all sorts of issues, and you name it, the federal budget touches everything, right? From Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, defense, tax policy, basically every issue under the sun you can find in the federal budget. But there's a lot of myths out there about the federal budget. Probably about half of my job is spent extinguishing myths, and we'll do some of that as we go along today. So if you're interested, I hope that you stay in touch with us. Check out the Concord Coalition's website at concordcoalition.org. Brian, as I mentioned, is here in Colorado, so we're always trying to do things here, and we're just so pleased to be back in Colorado. So the title of my talk today is Federal Deficits and Debt, an Unsustainable Future. And so we're trying to figure out a way to make it sustainable. So the first chart that I'm going to show you today is the composition of our federal budget and what it looked like before we even knew what COVID was. So this is the last normal year we had, which was 2019. And in this chart, it's basically two bar charts here. If we had a balanced budget, which of course we're nowhere near and haven't been for a long time now, these two towers would be the same height, right? So guess which one is spending and which one is revenue? The one on the left is obviously spending. And in the year 2019, we spent a good bit of money. We spent about $4.5 trillion at the federal level, but we only brought in about $3.5 trillion. So even before COVID, that 1 year, we had a budget deficit of almost $1 trillion, and the economy was doing okay then. I mean, it's a pretty good economy during that time, but we were running these massive deficits even during the good times. We weren't fixing the roof while the sun was shining, so to speak. So this is how we entered into COVID. And one of the things that I could take up this whole speech just talking about this one chart, but I won't do that. I do want to point out one thing in particular here, though, and that is interest on the debt. So our national debt right now stands at around $28 trillion, and we have to pay interest on that debt. Now, fortunately for us, interest rates are where right now? Pretty darn low, right? So, but even with low interest rates, we paid $375 billion simply paying interest on the debt. Now, I bet there's a wide variety of opinions in this room about what we want our federal government to do in terms of the budget, but maybe that's one area that we can agree on. That could be money either better spent somewhere else, or maybe for tax cuts or for defense or a safety net, whatever it is you want from your federal government. We've got $375 billion tied up just simply paying interest in the debt. A lot of other things coming here. Healthcare is a big theme. You'll hear that a lot today too. Healthcare is a big theme when we talk about this. We've got to figure out a way to bend the long-term healthcare cost curve. If we don't do that, it really doesn't matter what we do and all these other things. That's kind of the big thing, the gorilla in the room, so to speak. And then over here on the revenue side, you can see that most of our revenue at the federal government comes from individual income taxes, right? In fact, more than half of our money comes from individual income tax. And then a big chunk comes from payroll taxes. And then we have some corporate income taxes and some fees and fines and a variety of other ways that we bring in money. Now, before COVID hit, the federal debt was already approaching record levels, right? And so what we see here is kind of a history of the federal debt going back to 1900. And basically what it shows is back in the old days, we would only have a big debt if there was a big problem. And if you're a student of American history, you can see everywhere we have a giant leap on this chart. It's a big American event, right? Here you have World War I. Here you have the Great Depression. Here you have, by the way, this was supposed to be the war to end all wars, right? Unfortunately, it didn't work out that way. Here's World War II. We really bet the farm on World War II. So far, that's our modern record with debts, by the way, on World War II. It was a good bet to make. We won in many ways. We're still enjoying the benefits of having won World War II. And then we paid that debt down. But then something interesting started happening around the 1980s. We actually our debt started going up, and we weren't at war, and we weren't in a Great Depression or a Great Recession. And it's sort of the credit card era, I would call it, sort of came on the scene. And then it went up in the 1980s. In the 1990s, we actually balanced the budget for a few years. A lot of people don't remember that. And then, of course, after the turn of the century, September 11th, which that anniversary is coming up. And then we had a Great Recession, and you can see that the debt has just been going up and up and up. Now, what causes these? Well, obviously, it's a mismatch between spending and revenue. And this chart is probably a chart only an economist would love, but if you look closely at it, you can see going back to 1970, our revenues and our outlays. So our outlays are in blue and our revenues are in green, and very infrequently do the revenues catch up to our spending. Again, I mentioned the late 1990s. That was one of the time periods circled in red right here. Unfortunately, those annual surpluses were too small and didn't last long enough to really put a big dent into the problem. And then here you can see after, again, the Great Recession, we had a widening of it, and then a huge widening of it in that area. And then it's projected to be even wider. So unemployment last year jumped huge. So everything I've been showing you so far has been pre-COVID. All of a sudden, COVID hit in March of 2020, and something really scary happened. In the 20 more years I've been doing this, I've never seen anything like it. Unemployment jumped 10 points in 1 month, and that was very frightening. Now, it has since come back down, and we were talking about Labor Day earlier, and part of my talk today involves labor. But you can see unemployment has come down, but it kind of petered off around 5.8, 5.9. And then last month it came out at 5.4. We're expecting another jobs report any day now. It'll be very interesting to see what that is. But 5.4 is still significantly higher than what it was right before COVID hit, right? We were hovering around 3.5 unemployment. So that was a very scary month when we saw that happen. And And so we had an immediate recession upon us. It was a COVID-induced recession. And these numbers were huge too. I've never seen numbers in my lifetime like this. In the second quarter alone of 2020, we had a GDP drop of almost 9%. Had that persisted for an entire year, our economy would have lost a third of its value. So thank goodness it didn't. But Washington responded in a fairly big way. So they started off, and all this was on a bipartisan basis. There was $8 billion immediately passed for coronavirus preparedness and the Response Supplemental Act. Then next came the Family First Coronavirus Response Act. And then there was the big one just a few weeks later on March 27th. And that was the CARES Act, which stands for Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act. And that was a big one. If it's got a comma in it, it actually goes from billions to trillions. So we spent about $1.7 trillion in that one bill. Then in April, a month later, the Congress and the President passed HR 266, was the Paycheck Protection and Healthcare Enhancement Act. And then later on in the year, you probably remember when the checks went out in December, that was the Coronavirus Response and Relief Act, and that one was $868 billion. So a lot of this was pretty timely, temporary, and targeted. We at the Concord Coalition, we call it our 3 T's test. And almost all of this stuff fit that bill. However, COVID relief is becoming less timely, less targeted, and less temporary as we got into this year. So on March 27th, we passed the American Recovery Plan Act, another whopping bill. This one was almost $1.9 trillion. And it did all sorts of things, but I will tell you, there's some good things in it, but there was also some things that were less timely, less targeted, and certainly less temporary. And by the way, I can share all these slides with you guys later. I'll send them to you guys, and feel free to dive deep into any of these. But that shows what we did back on March 27th. And by the way, this doesn't take into account any of the news you've been hearing lately from Washington about infrastructure or the $3.5 trillion budget resolution that recently passed the House. None of those things have passed both houses yet or have been signed yet by the president. So obviously, this had significant consequences on our debt and our debt projections. And this is what this chart shows. With this chart, you can see going into COVID, we thought we were going to have $1 trillion deficits, basically as far as the eye could see. And now all of a sudden, we've got $3 trillion deficits. And of course, all of this is what I just explained to you. Basically, again, it doesn't count what they are probably about to pass. And of course, our national debt. If you look at the debt and the debt held by the public, that's had a huge impact. So basically, our debt is about 26% larger than we thought it was going to be before COVID. So a huge impact. So our nation's fiscal challenges don't end with COVID. Fortunately, the projections show that the deficits that are caused by COVID will eventually wane. And you can see that here on this chart because our deficits are huge right now. They're projected to come back. But look what happens in the 2030s. We actually start approaching emergency level deficits again, but without the emergency. So, what is it that's driving these things? And to look at it another way, this is the debt. So the debt is scheduled to grow pretty quickly. We expect the debt to maybe stabilize a little bit over the next few years, right around that World War II record. And then in the not too distant future to start just kind of stratospherically going up. So we can't let this chart happen. This is this chart's not sustainable. So what is it that's driving these forces beyond the emergency that we're experiencing now? Well, it's on this chart right here. Basically, if you're not talking about one of these things, one of these 4 things, you're not talking about what's driving our debt. And I'll verbalize this for the people in the back of the room. So Medicaid, CHIP, and the exchange subsidies are scheduled to grow. Social Security obviously is scheduled to grow. We have this huge demographic challenge, right? That's another thing. Our people in general over recent history have been living longer. The past year or two, those numbers have come down a little bit, but the general trend is that we're living longer and having fewer children. And so that affects Social Security and Medicare. And so huge expenditures expected to come in Medicare. But look at this big giant one here. Interest on the debt. So, I mean, this is just scheduled to, this is going to be 6.8% of the size of our economy. All other spending is actually expected to shrink over this time period. So again, when you hear me talking about things like Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, it's not because I have a bone to pick with those programs. I mean, I had grandparents too who really enjoyed those programs. And in fact, Social Security has done a wonderful job at keeping seniors out of poverty. In fact, when Social Security first came about, the most likely group in America to live in poverty were senior citizens. Now, senior citizens are the least likely group to live in poverty, mainly because of Social Security. But we've got to do something to fix it. And in fact, it's very timely that I'm here speaking to you in Denver today, because just this week, the Social Security trustees came out with a delayed report that showed, because of all the stuff we've been doing with COVID, it's actually exacerbated our problems. And the trust fund runs out quicker than we thought it was. It's going up by a year. So now the Social Security Trust Fund is expected to dry up around 2034. And so if we don't do something about that between now and then, in 2034, which by the way happens to be right about the time I retire, then my check will be cut off by, about 23%. It'll just be lobbed off if we don't do something, or we'll have to raise taxes significantly, payroll taxes. And obviously COVID's had a big impact on that, right? Because when we're looking at those unemployment numbers, how is Social Security funded? Through the payroll tax, right? And if people are losing their jobs and they're not working, they're not paying payroll taxes. So that money that we thought that was going to be into Social Security over the past year or so, not as much has come in. The opportunity cost of net interest payments is really, really high. And what I mean by that, if you look on this chart, you can see the projected interest is in red. The primary deficit and the net interest is actually in gray, I'm sorry, right here. But by 2040, the non-partisan Congressional Budget Office predicts that by 2045, they project that net interest payments will actually exceed what we spend on Social Security. We're going to be spending more on interest payments than we do the giant Social Security program. So usually that gets people's attention, but still we're doing nothing about it. Back to this chart again, the one that only economists would love. The reason I bring this back up is because I want to talk a little bit about revenues. I've talked a lot about spending, but we actually have a revenue challenge as well. And in this chart, you can see that, again, the history of our revenue is in green right here. And you can see our total revenues and outlays as a percentage of GDP. But revenues are expected to be pretty flat over the next few years. So let me show you another chart. Again, remember where most of our money comes from is individual income tax. So how do we get that money from the individual income tax? It gets back to what we were talking about Labor Day earlier, right? The size of our labor force and the efficiency of our labor force. And that's what constrains our growth when you get to the bottom of it, right? Because that's how we get to this growth is by those two factors. And the percent change in the drivers of potential GDP growth, you can see here, the potential labor force size and the potential labor force productivity is expected to shrink. Well, I went to the University of Georgia, and as far as I know, I was taught there's only two ways you can increase your labor force. One of them is for a different class, right? Having more babies. Hopefully everybody knows how to do that by now, but we're not doing enough of it. So there's only one other way. And that's through immigration policy. And I don't know what the last time y'all checked in with Washington, but despite the fact that most Americans could probably agree on some immigration policy, Washington is dramatically polarized on that issue. So I don't see any huge immigration reform issues coming up before us anytime soon. And those are really the two main ways that we get to the size of our labor force. One other thing I want to tell you, when we look at our revenue challenges, is it's probably worse than the Congressional Budget Office is telling us, because when the Congressional Budget Office gives us our revenue forecast, they are required by law to only consider current law. Well, guess what? All the tax cuts that were passed back in 2017, they expire in 2025, which is preceded by a presidential election year in 2024. So I think most of those candidates are going to do what we did with the 2012 tax cuts, and they're going to extend them, right? So if you extend those tax cuts, obviously it's going to affect our revenue situation. So our revenue situation is even worse than most people show it to be. And we're losing time. Time is a precious commodity as well, that we all know, right? And not only are we losing money, but we're losing time, because the longer we wait to tackle these challenges, the harder it is to do it. So for example, if we wanted to say, start up a plan, and we did this last night, Brian and I were on the campus of Colorado State, and we got together with students and community members to assemble a 10-year federal budget, to assemble a plan. But say we wanted to do something like that in real life. Obviously, we can't do it right now. We're trying to recover from COVID. So let's say we'll start this in 2025. Well, our plan will start to activate in 2025 to make us sustainable. We would have to find savings of about $730 billion per year if we start in 2025. That's like eliminating the whole Department of Defense. I mean, that's how big that number is. That's if we start in 2025. If we wait until 2030, then it jumps up a whole lot further. And that's what this chart shows. So we've got to act sooner rather than later. And we've known about these challenges for so long, but we keep wasting so much time on solving them. So as I finish up here, I want to say there are lots of reasons that we should be concerned about the debt and the deficit, fiscal responsibility, making these things sustainable. So let's just take them one at a time. So climate change has made the news a lot lately. And the debt is kind of like that, in that once it becomes a conspicuous problem and we can all see it, that might be too late. We need to act before that happens. Next, rising debt really does reduce the fiscal space that we need in order to respond to the next crisis. And I promise you, there will be another crisis. I don't know what it is. It's going to be another hurricane's going to hit us, wildfires. I hope it's not another pandemic. That one really played to our weaknesses, didn't it? But whatever it is that comes our way, we'll be better prepared if we're in a fiscally sustainable position. Next up, our fiscal security is closely related to our national security, right? And that's why, like Admiral Mullen, he's once the former Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman said, you know, the most important challenge facing us today are these issues related to fiscal response. Because if we don't get our economic house in order, we won't be able to pay all the things that we need for our national defense. So these things are closely linked. And the other thing that's been a little bit, I'm getting in the weeds a little bit, but I think this is worth pointing out. And that is, we've been using our debt to finance a lot of consumption, not investments. And to put that on a personal level, I mean, and Judge, you understand this better than most folks. Debt can be enabling or debt can be debilitating, right? Depending on how it's used. At the personal level, there's a lot of ways that it can be enabling, right? If you get a great deal on a house and you get a great interest rate on a house and you get a great loan on a house, say a 15-year loan, and the housing market does good over that 15-year time period, that's a good investment to borrow for, right? But if you're using your credit card to pay your gas bill and your electric bill, that's not a good way to use debt, right? And so at the national level, you can use it the same way. If we're using our debt to fund consumption rather than investment, that is an unhealthy situation. And then I mentioned over and over again interest, so I won't drill that one home again. But I'll also say, you know, that I don't want to get on a high horse here, but there's a generational issue here at play as well that is immoral in a certain standpoint. And what I mean by this is, there are decisions that are being made in Washington today, or more realistically, decisions that are being failed to be made, that disproportionately affect young people, right? And so that's one reason that we spend so much time on college campuses like Colorado State. We're trying to get the attention of young people, trying to get them involved, because they have a greater stake in this than anybody else when you look at these long-term trends. And so given that, I'll end with this. This is all of our contact information here. Our website is concordcoalition.org. We have a newsletter called The Lookout that we'd love to send your way if you want to sign up for that. And we also do a podcast, which Brian and I were on just this morning, talking about being here in Colorado. That podcast is called Facing the Future. It's an award-winning podcast that is highly ranked, and I think you'll enjoy it. And then, of course, we're all over social media if you want to see us on there. And then lastly, I'll just say, if there's any place that you know where this presentation might be worthwhile, please let us know, because we'd like to get it out to as many places as possible. And again, especially on college campuses, because of how it disproportionately affects our youth. But I really appreciate you guys having me here today. It's been a pleasure. And I can always tell by a crowd, I usually have one or two effects on people. You're either scared to death on the edge of your seat, or I'll put you to sleep. And I don't see anybody asleep. So thank you for sticking with me through this presentation. Good to be with you guys. Happy to take some Q&A.
Okay, we have about 5 minutes or a little more for Q&A, and Brian's got the mic in the back.
And would y'all mind if I brought Brian Carter up here as well? Because Brian, you want to come on up and then help during the Q&A session too, and maybe put a Colorado spin on some of the answers that come up. Thank you.
Phil, thank you for being here. I think we're being consoled by economists that are telling us, I'm minimizing the complications of a modern monetary theory. Make all the money you want. It doesn't matter until inflation starts going up. And when inflation starts going up, you tax to stop the inflation, which means these numbers mean nothing. We just keep spending until inflation goes up. Then we start taxing to bring inflation down. That's a real minimalist explanation, but why shouldn't we be consoled by that?
Yeah, it's I'm consoled by that the same way I was consoled at Christmas time by Santa Claus, when I was younger. And that is, you want something to be true so badly. There's no children in the room. You want something to be true so badly, that you believe it. And there are other instances, other examples where when a country controlled its own currency, that they tried some experimental things like that, and it didn't work out very well for them, particularly when they went to printing money too fast. And to use your specific example, and we have heard a lot about MMT lately out there. It used to be a very fringe thing when I first started doing these speeches about 20 years now, and it's still pretty fringe. It's very hard pressed to find a solid economist who will completely sign off on that and say that utter the phrase that deficits don't matter. What has changed over time is a lot of experts and a lot of economists have come to the conclusion, and it used to be they thought, oh, if we got to 100% of GDP, if our debt got to be 100% of GDP, that would be a line in the sand, so to speak. A lot of those people now are saying, oh, we could go all the way up to 150%. But then you have some those are the more responsible ones. You have some very irresponsible ones who set no ceiling whatsoever. So let's go along with their example for a minute when they promote something like that. And they say, okay, so say we were to do that and to implement MMT, and then say we have rampant inflation that occurs very suddenly and very dangerously. And by the way, there are a lot of people who've never experienced inflation. I look around the room. I don't want to guess anybody's ages, but most of us, it's been a long time, right? There's a lot of people living today have never really truly experienced the ferocious things that come along with inflation. So let's say we get that type of dangerous inflation. So when I've debated the MMT people, their response is, well, we'll just immediately get the Congress and the president to significantly raise taxes, just like you said, right? And I'm thinking to myself as a former congressional staffer, you're going to get Congress to turn on a dime and raise taxes and the president to agree with it. And it's like, that's one reason that the Congress is oftentimes tasked with fiscal policy and not monetary policy. And MMT kind of flips that on its head a little bit. So it worries me to put the whole economic future of our country at risk like that. The other thing that worries me in that example is right now, our monetary unit, the dollar, is the de facto monetary unit of the world, and we benefit greatly from that. It's probably the one thing that keeps us from being the best looking horse in the glue factory, frankly. And we don't want to mess that up. If people around the world who buy our bonds lose faith in us, because right now they have the most faith in us, American taxpayers, they are all around the world. They have great faith in us that we will repay those bonds. If we start to do something to make us look silly, and if they lose faith in us, then at that point we could really be in danger of killing the goose that's laying the golden egg. So hopefully that addresses some of those problems, but I can assure you deficits do matter. Deficits are money. Money matters. And if you try to print too much money, and remember when we were little kids and we played Monopoly or whatever, and if you put too much money and it devalues it, right, over time. And that's, a basic example of inflation. So yes, sir.
Historically, interest rates have been the rate of inflation plus about 3%. Current interest rates are at about 1%, as we know. Inflation, of course, is significantly higher, meaning that the true interest rate that we will eventually get to is 3, 4, 5, 6%. On a 30, trillion debt. Each 1% is $300 billion. Your charts showing what will happen to the net amount of interest to be paid were based on the approximate 1% that we're currently paying. What will happen? And of course, I think we know the answer. But what will
My
happen
chart's not tall enough.
if indeed we do go back to 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8%
Yeah.
interest?
It's a scary situation. And by the way, the chart that I was showing on that is based on some Congressional Budget Office numbers, and they do instill a tiny amount of interest rate increase in there, but nothing like what you spoke of. If that were to happen, then you would see the numbers explode. And I jokingly say that my chart isn't tall. It literally is not tall enough. We'd have to go to the what floor are we on? 15. We'd have to go to the 16th floor to show how high that would go. And obviously that's unsustainable. We can't let that happen. But it's one of the things we've been lulled to sleep on, because if there was one thing that I and a lot of other deficit hawks did not predict correctly 25 years ago, it was that we would have this long of an extended time period with such low interest rates. And so now our policymakers seem to be banking on that and assuming that would happen. So they're assuming the best, assuming the worst and preparing for the best, when it should be the other way around. So your point is well taken. Thank you, sir. Yes, sir.
So one, this is grim. Two, I had a question based on, you said in the late 90s, we actually did have it balanced. So two questions. One, what were the conditions then that actually led to that? Because it seems like an impossibility given how politics work, short-term
Good question.
interests, blah, 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 all that. And two, if we really do have to pay the piper, if it comes down to it, what does that look like?
Yeah. So your first question I love, because it gets back to the founding of the Concord Coalition in 1992, which was such a special year for people involved with fiscal policy. I think back to that year and all the people that were running for president that I mentioned earlier, and then I compare it to 2016 and 2020, and what a night and day difference. In the year 1992, almost without exception, every single candidate was talking about these issues in one way, shape, or form. Start with the incumbent president, George H.W. Bush at the time. He lost so much sleep over these issues once he became president that he actually went back on the biggest pledge he ever made, right? Remember that? Read my lips, no new taxes. So he actually went back on that. And then I mentioned Paul Tsongas, his entire campaign. And by the way, Paul Tsongas actually defeated Bill Clinton in New Hampshire, mainly because he was talking about these issues up there, right? Bill Clinton was supposed to come in like 4th or 5th, but then he came in 2nd, became the comeback kid, and the rest of that history. But Bob Kerrey, who was also running that year, who by the way is now the Democratic co-chairman of the Concord Coalition, along with Jack Danforth, Republican of Missouri. Bob Kerrey was running that year, and he was talking about these issues. And who could forget Ross Perot that I mentioned earlier, running around the country showing, I mean, all these people were running. And so it was no coincidence just a few years later, and I'll give credit to somebody from my home state as well, Newt Gingrich, from Georgia, when the Republicans took over Congress in 1994, it was difficult. We had some government shutdowns, and it was some heavy gridlock. But at the end of the day, the Republicans kept the Democrats from spending too much, and the Democrats were able to keep the Republicans from cutting taxes too much. And that combined with winning the Cold War, we got I often say, I wish we could win the Cold War twice. We got such a huge benefit from that. That was one of the big things. And of course, the economy in the 1990s helped out a lot too. So those were all the forces that went in to eventually surprising us, frankly, with those surpluses of the late 1990s. What does a solution look like? It's a mix of things. I think we have to address healthcare, as I mentioned earlier. We've got it. Well, oftentimes when we talk about healthcare reform, we talk about who's going to pay for it. In other words, will it be a single payer system where the government does it all? Will it be a hybrid like Obamacare? Will it be like we've been used to it, where our employer has such a huge role? But we very rarely talk about bringing down the cost of healthcare. We've got to figure out a way to do that. If we don't, it doesn't matter whatever these reform programs we implement. Obviously, we've got to put Social Security on a stronger standpoint. So that's it. And then I mentioned we have a revenue challenge. One of my big problems with the 2017 tax cuts was that it was a missed opportunity. Instead of just having straight up tax cuts, which again is kind of like Santa Claus, we needed tax. Our tax code is ridiculously complicated and ripe for reform. And instead of taking on that challenge, our leaders in 2017 decided just to take the easy route and give us straight up tax cuts, which expire in 2025 after that. So we've got to do something on the revenue side too. So it's probably big mix of those things, something on revenue and then reforming those things. And before I close out, I do want to bring Brian up to the microphone just for a minute to say hello to everybody. This is your Coloradan Concord Coalition. Thank you for all that you've done this week.
You bet. So Brian Carter, live in Fort Collins. In my career, I'm in sales with a fabulous tire manufacturer. I won't say the name now because it's not an advertisement, but I do this because I have 3 kids, 15, 13, and 12. And I am completely bought into the fact or the idea that this is not sustainable. And there's some hard things we have to look in the face. And so that's why I'm doing this. I do it as a volunteer. We would love to do more events in Colorado. Those could be at universities, and we have plenty of colleges and universities around the state where we can do the 2-hour budget exercise that we did last night, and more talks like this, civic groups and otherwise. So my contact information will be available, and if you would like us to coordinate that, we're happy to do it. Thanks.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you all very much. Great to be with you.
Thank you so much, Phil. That was fascinating, timely. All right, this has been a great program. And what we want to present you with on behalf of your speech and your presentation that you shared with us today, our club will be donating to the International Polio Now program. It's Rotary's goal to eradicate polio worldwide. We will inoculate 33 children on your behalf. And with the 2-to-1 build from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, 100 children will be inoculated.
Wow, that's impressive.
Thank you so much. All right. Next week, real quick, again, alt week. And if you want to bowl, if you want to go have cigars, drinks, or meet Shannon at Jing. So there's some options for you. Now, let's join in the 4-way test. Of the things we think, say, or do, is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? On that note, I need my high heels and get out of my Chuck Taylors.